Welcome back to the secret world of human trafficking. I'm your host, David J. Story, and I'm also the author of the Omega book series. I want to welcome our guest for this episode, Eric Robinson, a retired FBI agent with over 24 years of experience. He's going to share insights into the tactics used by traffickers and the efforts that law enforcement use to combat this crime. Here we are with retired FBI agent Eric Robertson. And I want to go ahead and have you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the all nitty gritty.
So I am 3 months retired from 24 years in the FBI, where I got to work just about every violation the Bureau had. Started with drugs, gangs, public corruption, organized crime, crimes against children, which I think we'll talk about here, financial crimes, and national security and human intelligence. I spent 15 years of that time as a SWAT operator, along with being an investigator. Got to do just about all the training as an instructor that the FBI offers. So wonderful career, a lot of exciting times I had, great people I worked with. And probably the biggest unique factor about me is that prior to joining the FBI in 2002, I was a Baptist pastor and spent about 12 years in Christian ministry before I left that and got into law enforcement.
What got you to leave that and go into law enforcement?
I needed to find a job that had less stress, and so I joined the FBI.
Okay. I had considered years ago going into the ministry myself.
Yeah, it's great. It's great if you can deal with the things going on. I just wasn't able to.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of drama in the church, especially the Baptist church.
That's where I was, and
that's where I was too.
The difficulty is, like, when working in law enforcement, when criminals do criminal things, you go, okay, that's what they do. And in the church, when Christians do unchristian things, it's disappointing and it's frustrating, and it created a lot of stress for me. So I struggled for a long time, and finally my body wouldn't take it anymore, and I moved on. Applied to the FBI on a whim, which I think pisses off some of my friends who like crafted their whole career and education to get into their dream job. And I thought, oh, that sounds cool. Let me try that. And surprisingly, the FBI said, yeah, we'll take you on.
Great. Yeah. I was an ordained deacon during my time there. And I remember one story that we had a couple that wanted to join our church, and they were living together. They weren't married. So, we came up to the vote to accept them into the church and all like that. And this one lady stood up, said, we don't want to allow them to come into the church because they're sinners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got to keep those sinners out.
Said, yeah, you don't want sinners in the church.
You don't want sinners in church, man.
No, only the godly ones.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's what we're here for.
Well, and that was how I had planted that church in Western New York. I told our people, look, if we're going to make errors, we're going to err on the side of grace. So if God wants to judge us, he's going to judge us for being too accepting and forgiving. So if people come and you smell alcohol in their breath, or they've got weird piercings, or homosexual couples, or whatever it might be, like, you got to be able to not flinch when they come in. And that was great. People were coming, their lives are being changed. But my issue was those people were also coming with their own problems, and I couldn't separate myself from that. And so it built the stress over the years. So I just had to find something else. And the FBI ended up feeling like a much better fit for me too, eventually.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, tell us a little bit about the human trafficking aspect that you worked in.
Yeah, so in Toledo, Ohio, which is a satellite office for the Cleveland division, a medium-sized office with about 15, 20 agents, I was working organized crime, and the head of the task force had moved on to headquarters for a couple of years, and I was asked to head that up. So we had another agent with me, a good friend named Laura. I just talked to her about this last night, and then a number of task force officers on different sheriff's departments and police departments. A great detective named Pete who had been working there for years. And at that time, in the early 2000s, our mandate was to, I mean, we were looking for people who were trading in and producing child sexual abuse material, but the main mandate for that task force was to find trafficked, and for our case, it was girls who, slightly older men, usually men in their mid 20s, were now taking these girls and trafficking them, pimping them out in the area. And the reason Toledo was doing such a tremendous job at this was that in 2005, there was a sting at a truck stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And in that sting, an inordinate number of pimps and underage prostitutes were picked up from the Toledo area. So because of that, now Toledo, even though it's a small city of maybe 250,000 people, set up this task force with a number of people working it to try to remedy this problem. So that's what we worked on, to find these girls, get them away from the pimps, and bring charges against the pimps.
So tell us what it's like to work in a situation like that where you're, trying to, dealing with the pimps, the trafficking, and, the young children. What's the emotional?
Well, I mean, honestly, the emotion was often frustration, because these teenage girls were often runaways. They were ones who were coming from a bad home situation. So they had adults in their lives who were useless. Like, they were either abusive, drug addicted, absent. And so these girls were runaways or fosters, and they were trying to escape their negative life. They were looking to just get out on their own. And in desperation, of course, they didn't have trade talents. They weren't getting a job at Taco Bell to support themselves. And so the one thing that they had was their bodies. So these girls were prostituting themselves, typically. Sometimes they were vulnerable and manipulated by the pimps, but typically they were out on their own ahead of time, doing this poorly. And then 26-year-old man would see them and say, "Hey, I can help you. Here's how you're going to advertise yourself. I'll give you transportation. I'll give you security, give you a place to live." And the girls, you're 15, 16. You can be street smart, but you're not that smart, and they would fall for this. The men, of course, were very practiced, knowing how to make their deliveries and how to manipulate. So when we would arrest the pimps, they would very often fight the charges either through trial or up to, because their mindset was, I didn't make them do this. Like, they were already doing this. I was just helping them. So they didn't understand that the difference between what you or I would do, if we encountered a teenage girl who was prostituting herself, we would help them rather than take advantage and make money off of them. So those were charges 15 years, 20 years, depending on the age of the girl.
Oh. How widespread is the problem of human trafficking, sex trafficking, specific?
Well, so yearly, the FBI does, and there's going to be task forces, and they'll be of varying sizes. It could be one agent, it could be two, and then a large task force. But every division is going to be addressing this. And then every year there is Operation Cross Country, where the FBI spends a week, each division on their own, depending on how they want to do it, of setting up stings or working with people to kind of make the numbers. So it's a push to actually get things done, but also a push to get numbers to say, hey, here's girls that we've rescued. And that could be working through a guardian ad litem who's going to be a legal representative for underage people in court. It could be us working with juvenile detention centers where they would be saying, hey, this girl, when she came in, she had the newest iPhone and some jewelry, not something that, girl on the street would have. Or she was picked up by a man who seemed like he might be a pimp. And so we're working with them to identify these girls. And we're doing this throughout the week anyway, but now we're doing a big push that here's our one time where we're going to see what we can do to rescue some of these girls. And on the stings, we set up hotel rooms. We might even get a semi that we can pretend that we're a truck driver who's making the calls in. And then we're trying to identify either girls that we believe to be underage that we're advertising or ones that look like they could be underage, try to bring them in so we can pull them away and then also arrest the pimps too.
What do you think the biggest misconception is about human trafficking?
So starting with this, I mean, the simplest misconception is that trafficking means you're being taken. You could be a 15-year-old girl and living at your friend's house, and this pimp comes, and then you have sex with men in that same house. That's trafficking. You don't have to be moved. You don't have to be held, under duress. For human trafficking, at least federally, if you're an adult, there needs to be proof of force, fraud, or coercion, which is much more difficult because the defense will always say, why didn't you just leave? But there can be manipulation through general threats, manipulation through drug use. But otherwise, one of the misconceptions that happens often, and we would see this in Toledo, people would start telling stories about girls getting kidnapped from bathrooms or being plied with like getting jabbed with a heroin needle and then taken away, when most of the trafficking situations that I came in contact with were done somewhat willfully, not like Liam Neeson's kid being pulled out from under the bed, but more a person whose frontal lobe hasn't developed and is under extreme duress and hard circumstances being driven or pushed or assisted in that sexual activity. And if you just think about it too, I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but it's a horrible thing. Like if you asked a woman or a young woman, what would it take for you to go have sex with strange men? Like men you don't know, usually quite disgusting too. Like that's a barrier that is so hard for your average woman to cross. They couldn't imagine that. But here are girls who are doing that, and so you knew either they had been abused themselves, and so in a sense that barrier had been crossed, or that part of their spirit had been crushed, or they're so desperate that that's all that they have, and as bad as it is, they have to cross that barrier.
I know a lot of people imagine this sexual pervert driving up to a little girl in a white van, sliding the door open and grabbing them and taking off. I mean, that's really not the normal case. It's a lot of it is through friends, or they're being groomed through the internet. What part of social media has played in enticing girls and boys into the human trafficking?
Well, David, you and I are close to similar ages, and so we were taught to be careful at the playground or the van that pulls up. And that's not even the case anymore, because why would you do that? Like, I have open access to children's homes through social media. It is, I mean, it runs the gamut that we, in the past few years, there's a nihilistic group, an anarchist group led by teenagers to prey on teenagers called 764. And these are ones
I
that
did
go,
I did a show on that too. I was going to ask you about 764.
brother, that's the worst thing I've seen. It's horrific. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's CSAM, child sexual abuse material, in a stew with mutilations, with historical pictures of the Holocaust, like just as dark as they can make it. But it's teens preying on teens, and those are popping up in forums meant for kids who are dealing with depression or divorced parents, like trying to find help. And so these other teens know, and they go there and work them, manipulate them, blackmail them. And then the reason that works so well is what we saw is very often then those victims turn around and do it to others. And now they start to victimize so they can gain clout and a position in that group. Like these are depression forums. These
Mm-hmm.
are groups where people are looking to connect and find help. These are, just Discord channels where kids are looking to talk about video games or something. And so, without making it sound like nothing is safe, nothing is safe. It
No.
could be anywhere
Yeah.
on
Well,
these anywhere in social
when we
media.
grew up, it was the playground and
That's it.
the white van. But now that the internet, that just gives them an easier access to your children. I mean, they're in your home. They're not outside, cruising around. They're in the child's bedroom.
Well, and David, I'll tell you, so it makes sense that as parents, as grown-ups, we're going to be more concerned with that type of harm. But also, there's a tremendous rise on social media and on these channels, not just for that, but also for the grooming towards radical ideology too. So the white supremacists, what we saw as we were investigating them, are looking to, like, they talk about violence, but the ones who try to stay away from violence, every group would emphasize hearts and minds. We're trying to win hearts and minds. And they know that that has to be in a younger generation. And I can't tell you how many times we would see, and it wouldn't be a subject, it would be somebody maybe we're looking at to see what they're up to. But I'd see this, 20-year-old kid or 18-year-old kid, and I think, how can you be so hateful when you haven't even been exposed to much? Like, I get it, you're a construction worker who's 60 years old and you've seen a lot in life, but they've been influenced even in this ideology at a young age, and now they adopt the same terminologies and the same hate speech.
Yeah, I read where some of the 664 group members have been tied to some school shootings.
Yeah, so they also, they will SWAT people. They do that. They do that also to extort. So they'll threaten to SWAT someone or someone's family, and then they'll show how they've been successful in the past. And so they do that to extort a teen to provide their own illicit photos or videos. They
Mm-hmm.
do that to get kids to carve, their initials of the extorter
Yeah.
into their skin, and the images are horrible. So they'll use that. They get into bomb threats to schools. They try to entice the kids to harm family pets or elderly members of the family. Those who are
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable, push grandma down the steps type thing. and the purpose is just to gain clout or to bring nihilism to the world.
Yeah, I mean, and as you said, I mean, it was started by a bunch of teenagers. They just, I guess, just got bored during COVID and say, hey, let's,
Let's explore this.
blackmail some kids. Yeah, extort some people.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as like, in our day, you'd go to an abandoned warehouse and throw rocks at windows and destroy property that way. Okay, that's not good, but it wasn't this. We had a case on I think was he 15, maybe 13. I mean, the kid was like 6'3" and 300 pounds, but he was one of the leaders in 764. And this kid, we took his computers, we took his phones. We woke him up at 6 a.m. with 3 guys with guns, rifles pointed at his face. Didn't stop him. He just gets another phone and he was right back in it. We had to go back and seize that phone. I mean, there's just a problem with him. And mom and dad
Yeah.
were broken up. So mom had him for a while. She says, I can't take him. Dad takes him for a while. That's when we arrested him. And then dad's like, I can't have him. So mom had taken him back. What can you do in a situation like that? I had one father call me once because we had been looking at his daughter as someone trying to determine if she was a victim or offender. And he called me outside of that after we had an interview and he goes, hey, can you give me some advice, man? I don't know what to do. She's out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times there's this internet issue, but it's also, there's problems like actual physical issues at home. And he's like, I don't want to call the police on her, but I feel like I have to because she's going to be a physical threat to my wife. And it's a lot for a parent to have to go through.
What's the youngest child that you've encountered that's been in this situation?
Well, so at this point, a buddy of mine named Alex had taken over the Violent Crimes Against Children Task Force, and there's not that focus anymore on going out and finding teen prostitutes. More of the trading of CSAM, but also now the working of undercovers. So like the trope of being, a 12-year-old girl online is actually a bearded FBI agent who's like 6'6". But but what one thing they do is work on these groups where parents offer their children to other men to come and assault them. And so I've been on a number of those arrests where, we're trying to set it up in a place, hotel, or somewhere out of the way of the public where they don't have to be downrange with guns. But these are men showing up believing that they are going to be engaging with a 2-year-old.
Wow. I mean,
and you see, and so you see the vehicle come in the parking lot and like, and what's going on in his head. He's like, I don't know. Is this real? Is these cops? And then they kind of circle and, we'll have one guy follow loosely, does he come back? And then the guy come back and like their adrenaline is so high because this is either the end of their life or they get to do something that for them is, a dark dream.
mm-hmm.
So those guys show up and they've got all the tools ready for what they're going to do. So it's, yeah, I mean, those weren't actual victims, but those were what the men were showing up thinking they're getting.
I can't imagine. I have children of my own and grandkids. I could not imagine putting them up for sale or for whatever, where I can get drugs or whatever. I mean, that's something you're supposed to love your children and
Yeah.
protect them, and put them purposely in harm's way is I can't comprehend that. It's
Yeah, there's always going to be something somewhere on the internet where these things are, specialty groups where, you have to be invited in or you have to trade CSAM to be accepted as bona fides. And, these are the ones that we infiltrate. And,
mhm.
it's, to me, it's always like everybody in their vehicles or around corners ready. They're holding their breath, wondering, is this guy going to show, hoping we can take somebody who's this bad off of the street.
Yeah.
But it's always remarkable to me when they show up, and I just think, this is unbelievable that's real.
Imagine it takes an emotional toll on you and the others.
It does to a degree. So part of it is, if you grab someone off the street and put them in the middle of this, that's going to be shocking. We've been waiting in that water for a bit, and so you get a little more, so it's not as shocking. We've been getting accustomed to what this guy is doing and what some things are, but also we follow up with each other of talking about it. I mean, there's going to be dark humor, which, again, if the public heard some of the things that agents joke about who are doing these things, they'd be appalled. But you say, hey, that's a way to deal with it. Like some of the stuff you look at, it's so bad that you have to have some outlet. And some of that too is just telling stories about, yeah, this is what went on, and now we're speaking things out loud. And speaking them out loud, I think, helps just to identify in reality, as opposed to like only perseverating and dealing with it within. And now you've got somebody who can identify with it too. Like, yeah, we went through this together.
Yeah. Yeah. I sort of joked around a little bit in my books, within the group and all like that I was writing about. And I had a lady who gave me sort of a negative review on that because, it's a serious subject and all like that, and you shouldn't be joking around. But, I realize, being in the profession I'm in, that you got to talk about it. And if you don't, you can't keep it in. And you do, it's dark humor. And it's a way of dealing with it, or you go crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll get burned out, and
there's a balance between, I can't let it affect me the way it would affect normal humans, because then I just, you start crying every day you go to work, and you can't do that. But you also can't harden yourself so much that nothing affects you, and now you're useless to your family because, I'm a stone. So somewhere in there where there has to be some self-reflection of, this is actually what I'm seeing and going through. I'm talking about it with others, and I realize that there are people like this out there, and we're doing our part. It's not everyone. It's this guy, and let's move on to another guy too.
Yeah. I was at a book signing a couple weeks ago, and this lady came up and asked me what my books were about. And I told her human trafficking, and she just threw up her hand. She said, "I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear anything about it." And it's like, well, that's the problem. No one wants to talk about it, and as long as it's kept in the dark, it's going to continue to grow. And that's one thing I did try to do with my books and this podcast is bring it to light.
Well, I tell you, that response signals to me that that's probably touched close to her, whether for her or someone she knows, that is something that she hasn't dealt with, probably.
Probably so. I don't know, but it sort of shocked me. And I just let her, she just turned around and walked off. And it's like, I said, well, that's one of the problems that's out there, that no one wants to talk about it. And it is a real sensitive subject. And I spent, when I was doing my research on my books and even for information on this podcast, I had sleepless nights, and I cried several times, and about the stuff that I discovered and the research and all like that. I could not believe what was going on out there. And And being in Atlanta, I found out that Atlanta is a major hub for
Absolutely.
trafficking.
Yeah.
And the United States is growing to be the number one capital in the world for trafficking, which is something you don't want to be the best at or the top at. What about the dark web? How does that play into the trafficking?
So I don't have much experience with the dark web other than interacting with some of my colleagues who have worked those cases. And those are places where and the dark web is one thing. You get on the onion router, and then there's also specialty groups that we have had some cases, and those are often more in trading CSAM, where guys will have to be vetted by offering it first before they can get in. I had a colleague who moved on to headquarters and was one of the major investigators into Operation Playpen, which was a vast network of trading in CSAM. So that's much of where that takes place. But then again, there's also the specialty groups where these are men seeking other men or sometimes women willing to offer their children. And it's just like the trading of CSAM. If I offer my kid, then maybe I'll get an opportunity to be with someone else's child.
Explain to those who really don't know what CSAM is.
So that could be that's child sexual abuse material, and it has I hate to give grades, but I'm just going to speak honestly that
Yeah, please
it
do.
could be anything from preteen or teen nudity down to very graphic images of infants, and there's different definitions as their kids get older of what's going to be decided on to be CSAM. So I've had cases where, we've got photos and the prosecutor's looking at it and saying, it doesn't, we don't have this, we don't have that. So there are cases where you can look at and you go, that's a child. There's no question. And if there's a place where someone is questioning, or if there's going to be a defense that we can't prove that that's a child, and then we'll send those photos to NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they have a large database where they can run photos against others and see, is this a known and identified victim that has been shared? And so if this is a known victim and here's a same picture or a similar picture, now we can say that is definitely a child and can use that in prosecution too.
Yeah, I've been looking into the AI generators and all of that, and you can just take a picture of some random person out there and take their headshot and place it on somebody else's body. And it could be a nude body of somebody else or a computer generated nude body, and take a picture of some child that's at a playground or at Six Flags or whatever, and then place that head on that body. That's beyond sick. But what can a parent do to protect against that? Is there anything you can do to protect it?
Probably not fully. I mean, I would say locking down a child's social media to only, and this should be the case anyway, aside from AI generated movies, but locking it down to friends only, and occasionally talking to your kids about, hey, can we go through your friends list and can you identify everybody for me here? You've got 104 friends. Can you go through and say, I know this is this person? I mean, that's going to definitely minimize and mitigate those issues if there are fewer images of children. Because at that point, someone who's going to do that and manipulate video is going to more likely just try to find someone else who's available out there. But then we'll also find that on occasions we've had offenders are looking to offend against people they know. We had a case against ended up being an adjunct professor in a local university who was sexually extorting women, but they were women from his hometown, and taking over computers, stealing images, extorting them to provide more, moving on to another woman doing the same under this account. So he was not just out seeking gratification in anyone, he was seeking gratification from girls who had grown up in his high school and now had spread out. And that is something that can be seen too, where, well, I want to have an image of my neighbor kid, and that's a matter of being aware of like who's around you. Are they showing too much of an interest in your child?
Yeah. Or, they could even take a picture that you posted on Facebook or whatever about your vacation at Disney World, and they can take that picture of your child, the headshot of your child or whatever, and use that. So they don't even have to be in physical presence with your child. It could be a photo off of social media that you've posted. So it's, the bad guys are getting smarter, and they're getting more and more tools, just put in their lap that they can use.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this AI stuff it's sort of blown me away. Just the simple stuff I've looked at doing and looked into. It's like, man, if you really got into this AI stuff, you could really do a lot of damage.
Yeah, where you and I grew up, didn't even grow up, later in our lives, had DOS-based computers with dot matrix printers with perforated edges on the printer. So it has changed a little bit.
It has changed, and I cannot imagine what it's going to be like in another 10 or 15 years, or even two years. I mean, it's growing so fast now, and it's hard to believe what just the growth in computer technology in our lifetime. And I remember before there was even computers and cell phones and things like that. Now, kids 4 or 5 years old have a cell phone.
Well, so we had a case years back where it was on a sex offender who had been in prison for having child pornography, but he had it back when you had to know of a address to request coming from the mail. Like, he got busted in the old school, like VHS video type days, magazines. So he's in prison. He gets out, and a younger guy goes, "Oh, look, you just have to type things on this box and it'll come up immediately." He's like, "Oh my gosh, you can have access to it anytime." He got busted pretty quickly after that, but
I'm sure.
It was back in the day. Illicit material was through word of mouth and sending $50 to some PO box and then getting a brown package in the past, and that's how this guy got it. And beyond, even, you talk about the computer's abilities. We used to find, like, it used to be that you could find thumb drives and such. There are now nanobytes of movies and pictures that people are like. I remember when we got into gigabytes and then terabytes, and so there's so much that can be stored on top of that too.
Well, yeah, I think my first computer had 256K of memory, and I figured out a way to bump it up to a gig, or no, 1 meg. And I told my wife at the time, I said, I'll never need another computer again.
Yeah. And you had a 3.5 by 5 actual floppy disk.
Yeah. Monochrome monitor and dial-up, AOL dial-up. Well, what are some of the grooming tactics that some of these people use to entice?
So I had a case years ago where a 13-year-old boy um, was assaulted by a man in a town about an hour and a half away. And the parents had found out about this by seeing messages on the child's iPad through a separate app called Kick. So, messaging app. And this was often one that pedophiles, that sex offenders would try to direct people to. So, the again, continuing with the internet, it's people starting with just a simple interaction, finding out, you know, about the child, about the victim, and then trying to direct them to a different manner of contact or platform. So, I mean, that's one thing. If anyone ever says, hey, jump to here, message me on this, go to Snapchat, that's that's going to be a signal if they're trying to get them to somewhere else. And then it's just like the scammers kind of fishing online, like they're throwing things out to see how kids are going to respond. And the case with this 13-year-old boy, he, when it was first reported to me and the parents came in, he was, I remember thinking, remarkably unfazed by it. He just told it matter of fact, and he was fine, and he was laughing and joking. And this wasn't a kid, to me, who had been sexually assaulted. Like that was odd.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until later when we started building the case, and then the kid was more and more separated from the man, I think he was 27, that then the anger and resentment came in. So the kid got caught in this mesmerizing situation where this was a man who treated him well, took him to amusement parks. They did fun stuff. Like, it wasn't just he was trying to build a relationship. They did things that the kid enjoyed, and also he was assaulted. And and so it didn't, like, for the boy, I don't think it registered to him what actually this was about. And then as we were getting ready for charging, now the boy had anger, and now the boy was starting to process the trauma. So whatever that grooming is, it's making the child, the victim, not see this as harmful, but as a normal thing. Somehow creating an atmosphere where I am not assaulting you, I am showing you affection, attention, and we're sharing this together.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever, I guess, weakness they can discover that child has, they'll prey on it and build on that. Whether it's loneliness or not having this particular game or whatever, they'll fill that void and to build a relationship.
Well, in this case, the young boy was gay, and the parents knew that, and they were fine. But I have to imagine that part of that was acceptance of, if you're a 13-year-old boy, and he honestly looked like he was 10, and you're effeminate and you're gay, you're, no matter what group you're with, you're not accepted by everyone. And so here's a man who's showing him acceptance. And
Mm-hmm.
it overall, it's finding that weakness, like you said, but also no child is on the internet. Well, I don't say no child, but the victims typically are not on the internet saying, I'm looking for a sexual encounter with an adult man. And so the criminals are not, they know this, and they can't present it to the child from go as, would you like to have a sexual encounter with a man? They have to make it easing into that water so it's not so much of a shock. And so that process is going to be slow, and if they can be patient with it, they believe there's going to be a payoff.
What getting back to, you know, the parents and monitoring, what the child does. I know a lot of parents say, they don't, the kids have the rights and everything like that. They don't want to infringe on their personal space and all like that. That can be good, but it can also be harmful too. I mean, where does a parent draw the line as far as, the child's rights?
So this is where I would just give my personal advice, more from what I've seen, a little bit from the FBI experience, and that is, at an early age, the intrusiveness of the parent needs to be um, normalized so that it's not intrusive, that it's a normal function that you share with me as a child who you're out with. Hey, you stayed late after school. Who are you hanging out with? And it's not, and so it's not violating their privacy. It's just a normal sharing. And so when your child then gets a phone or a tablet at age 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever it is, it's normalized to say, look, here's a tablet. Uh, because you're getting introduced to this, I want to restrict some of the sites you're going to get on. And talking about it. So I say all that because for me, when my kids got phones and they started watching TikTok, it wasn't the kind of stuff we're discussing. For my wife and I, it was more of the volume of time spent, and we had allowed that for too long. And so now when you have somebody who's used to just doing this and you say, hey, maybe you can put that away and only get it out this time, now that is a significant withdrawal. So if there's an easing into it and a normalization of this is what we do, parent to child, you're sharing with me who you talk to, where you're going, what sites you're on, and that's not intrusive. It's just part of our interaction as parent to child. If you try to
Yeah, I
get that
know.
going at 16, that's going to be harder.
Yeah, you got to start at an early age, or they're just going to be rebellious about it. You just going back to the 764 group. I mean, that's something that the parents have to be aware of because that group is out there preying on your children right now. And on top of all the other, perverts out there and predators out there, you got kids out there preying on your kids. And it's hard now, even distinguishing what a 15-year-old is or 18-year-old is. I mean, the girls and boys are more mature looking than they were when I was in high school. And, I'm sure that probably plays a big role in it. I mean, I'm sure when you bust somebody on one of these stings, they're going to say, they always say, well, I thought they were 16 or 18 or whatever. But, in truth, they were hoping they were, 14 or 13, because, 14-year-olds look like they're 18 or 19.
Yeah, when we
So,
when we get them charged, by the time we lock them up, it's been very clear from our undercovers saying, "Oh, is it okay that I'm only 12? Is it okay I'm only 13?" Definitely making sure that there's an intent very clear there for them.
that's good that y'all do that. So there's no question that the person is knowing that they are meeting a underage
Well,
child.
and part of that too is nobody wants to bust a guy who, is just, kind of pervy by trying to date someone 10 years younger than him who's 18, 19. Like, okay, I don't like that myself, but we're looking for those who are trying to harm people, not just those who are a little bit kinky.
Yeah. Yeah. There's enough of those out there
Yeah.
that you don't
Yeah.
have to worry about the
Yeah, we're gonna
35-year-old.
Well, look, I'll tell you, like my buddy Alex I remember one guy we arrested. he was, trying to work on some guys and see who would feed. And he goes like, this guy is driving me crazy. He was a former sex offender, and Alex was putting him off like, yeah. And the guy was so persistent of wanting to get with this 12-year-old girl. He's like, he's asking me to arrest him. Like, we have to now go get him. And you could go, like, the FBI could do an arrest every single day on a sexual offender, except for the time that it takes, the preparation of evidence, going to trial, operations. Like, you could do it every day. So they're going after the ones that are as bad as they can be, as opposed to just looking for some, college kid who is looking for a high school girl or something.
Yeah. I mean, law enforcement is way understaffed to deal with this, and there's all kinds of crime out there, and trafficking is just one aspect out there that law enforcement like you and your colleagues are having to deal with, and you can only do so much. Like you said, it's not all of them are just going and arresting somebody and boom, it's over with. You have the prep and the follow up and the trial. So it's if it was just a matter of seeing somebody commit the crime, go and arrest them, and boom, go to the next one. But there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, it's not just Chris Hansen of like getting online, bring them in, and then bust it. I mean, the evidence review, the downloading of computers, the phones, identifying, interviews, and now you're following up because we need to see if there are so there's CSAM on his phone. He already traded it, but has he offended in real time? We're interviewing nieces and daughters, sons, to see, was he alone? And it's not just that, because that's easy. Bring him in, put handcuffs on, but you're not doing your job the way you need to if you're not saying who's a victim, who's a real life victim that might have been in the house, and how are we going to start bringing them care too.
And I'm sure it's frustrating to, have a case that you've worked on and have something go wrong and they get off on a technicality, or some sharp lawyer finds a little loophole and they end up getting a slap on the wrist.
We don't get those too much. FBI usually does pretty well. Those occasions do pop up, but for the most part, like, we have typically done very well of saying this is sealed. The defense attorney comes and he's like, look, we're looking to make a deal. What can he do? That's it. Here's the images. I have no desire for my guy to try to testify about those.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, but I guess the ones who do get off, it really hurts. I know if I was in law enforcement and I worked on a case and I messed up by not, dotting an I or crossing the T properly, and the guy walks, that would bother me a lot. But I'm sure y'all have double checks and triple checks on things.
Yeah, I mean,
it happen that often, but it happens, I guess.
Yeah, definitely on other types of cases, I've had ones go, criminals that I know should be charged. I know they broke the law, but prosecutors are going to decline. Hey, we're going to indict these 5 instead of 7 or 8. And I get it. They've got limited time. They can't afford to go to trial on guys, even if they would agree to me man to man. Yeah, that guy broke the law.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the way life is. Tell me one other thing. I understand you wrote a book.
I wrote a book about these and other crazy stories, and my book, it will be published in the fall. It's with the FBI right now that they're reviewing to make sure I'm not sharing state secrets, which I didn't. And the book is entitled Irreverent: From Saving Souls to Chasing Sinners in the FBI. And I tell about how a guy who was a Baptist minister and never handled a firearm before happened to get into the FBI, and some of the remarkable cases that I got to initiate or assist in along the way. telling stories about working with informants, being on the SWAT team, and working a couple cases that were honored by an Attorney General's award. So I got to do quite a few things, and I never lost the fascination, despite some days of tedium and frustration of like, this is amazing that I get to be in the FBI. I get to be
Mhm.
part of this storied organization. And many of the things that I got to do really blew me away, especially in retrospect that, wow, we did that.
Yeah. Well, before you got in the FBI, you was saving souls. Now you're saving bodies.
Yeah, yeah. So if people want to follow along and see when the book comes out, they can go to my
Yes.
website, which is preacher2breacher.com, because I used to preach and then later I busted down your door.
I'll make sure to put that on and let everybody know, and keep us posted and let us know when it comes out, and I'll try to get the word out.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
You have anything else to add that you want to say before we go?
I appreciate your time. Thanks for getting to share such a important message so that parents can understand, not that they're going to worry so much and be frozen in their lives, but just to have a healthy awareness that there are people praying. I know parents are aware of this, but start, especially if your kids are young, of just having that conversation and normalizing acceptance and a support so that you can have that you can have that review of the kids' devices and discussions without it feeling like you're that hovering parent.
All right. Well, thanks again. I'm sure that you've gave us a lot of food for thought and a lot of information, and that's what the podcast is all about: getting information out there, sharing people's experience, and hopefully it will save some child from falling into the hands of some pervert.
I hope so.
Thanks again, and thanks for everything you've done and in service to your community and the country. And thank you.
Appreciate it, David.
That's it for our show for today. Thank you for joining in. I hope you were able to learn something today that may help you understand what is going on around you, allowing you to be aware of the dangers to yourself and perhaps a loved one, and maybe inspire you to get involved in the fight to stop human trafficking. Please follow me on Facebook, subscribe to my podcast, email me at davidjstory.com with your questions or comments. Music by tunereel.com. And please remember, always watch your six and others too.